Well, let's start with the big story that we are tracking at this hour, where the Marshal of the Indian Air Force, Arjan Singh, who passed away on Saturday evening, is to be laid to rest with full state honours. Now, these are live visuals which we are getting from the Brar Square, where the mortal remains of Marshal Arjan Singh have been brought in to its final resting place. Now, this is going to be a full state funeral, which is going to be accorded with a 17-gun salute. And you can look at the number of dignitaries who have gathered. Defence Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh is also present there. Now, the chiefs of the three wings of the Indian Defence Forces, the Army Chief, the Air Force and also the Navy Chief will, of course, be present. Now, the mortal remains of IAF Marshal Arjan Singh were brought in a gun carriage to the Brar Square, where the final rites will be performed. Now, a state funeral will be done, and apart from that, the family will also have a chance to come and perform the rituals which they feel are necessary according to the customs and traditions which they would like to perform. The body has been wrapped in the Indian tricolour. The IAF Marshal Arjan Singh passed away at the age of 98 on Saturday after he suffered a cardiac arrest. He was immediately rushed to a hospital, but then was declared dead. Remember, he was the hero who turned the tide around in the 1965 war. In many ways, this is the end of an era, as the final rites are being performed. We also expect a flypast to be carried out over the skies. So these are the various rituals which are of course being performed at the Brar Square. And meanwhile, we're also joined in by author Jagan Mohan, who's the author of the India-Pakistan Air War of 1965, who's joining us from the United States via Skype. Jagan Mohan, if I could come to you on this, it is an emotional day for all Indians. Not a lot of the present generation would be aware of the situation that was prevalent in 1965, because the fact of the matter is, today India has access to the best military hardware, but back in 1965, that was not the case. Despite the constraints, Arjan Singh managed to turn the tables on Pakistan. Talk to us a bit about, how big a loss this is for the Indian nation.
Hey, good morning, Saleh. Thank you for having me on this very solemn occasion where the nation is bidding farewell to the Marshal. Marshal Arjan Singh, as you know, took over command of the Indian Air Force in 1964. At that time, the Air Force was just coming off a massive expansion as a result of the 1962 war. We took in a lot of recruitment into the Air Force, and there was a lack of fully trained units. Pilots were being rushed into the force with minimal training, and the force was expanding at that time. It was up to the Marshal to actually make sure that the war plans were drawn out and kept ready. It would be prudent to note that till that point in time, the Indian Air Force has not fought an adversary in combat. I mean, after the Second World War, we only had a couple of small actions in which we either fought against the insurgents or just flew transport operations in the 62 war. So this was the first time in 1965 where the Indian Air Force has to engage an enemy in actual air-to-air combat.
Absolutely.
And the years preceding that was where the expansion and the training of the Air Force was undertaken under the guidance of the Marshal as well as his staff officers.
Right, Jagan Mohan, do continue to stay on with us. Meanwhile, we are getting live visuals from the Brar Square, where the final rites are being performed. The rituals which are necessary, which the family feels need to be performed, are being performed simultaneously. This is also going to be a state funeral. A 21-gun salute will be accorded. The Defence Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, along with former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, is present in the area where the last rites are to be performed. We expect the 21-gun salute in just a while, and we also expect a fly past which will take place. This is something which the Defence Minister had said, that if the skies were to be clear, this is something which will definitely be performed. Now, this morning, the skies over New Delhi are absolutely clear, and hence we expect the fly past will take place. So this is going to be a combination of a state funeral and also simultaneously a traditional funeral with the religious rites which will also be performed. In many ways, this is the end of an era, arguably the greatest, one of the greatest of the air warriors has passed away, and this is an extremely an emotional moment for all Indians, considering the kind of impact which Arjan Singh has had on the Indian defence establishment. And also I'm joined in by Lieutenant General Raj Kadian, who is a security analyst who's joining us. So Raj Kadian, if I could come to you on this, how significant is this loss? Arjan Singh was, of course, the architect of the Indian Air Force. He built it up virtually from scratch, and it's a huge loss for the nation. Is it going to be easy for India to recover from this?
Yes, Arjan Singh, the Marshal of the Indian Air Force, was the first and so far the only officer of the Air Force to reach that rank. And he was total. Can you hear me?
Right. Yes, Raj Kadian, we can hear you. So, just if I could interrupt you there, we just saw the 21-gun salute, which is being accorded in honor of Arjan Singh there. So, the 21-gun salute is presently underway at the Brar Square. Meanwhile, the traditional religious ceremonies are also underway by the family of Arjan Singh at the Brar Square, as this great warrior of India is going to be finally laid to rest at the age of 98. These are live visuals which we are getting from the Brar Square in New Delhi. Right, Raj Kadian, if I could come back to you on this, talk to us about how monumental has been the contribution of Arjan Singh to the Indian defence establishment.
Arjan Singh was the first air chief to assume that responsibility at the age of 44. He became air chief in 1964 and headed the Air Force for 5 years during the crucial period of transition of the Air Force from the old vintage to the modernity. He had left his imprint on the Air Force. 65 or the credible performance by the Air Force was basically of his consummate leadership. Apart from being a very skilled fighter pilot himself, he was a very consummate leader who inspired confidence of all the Air Force rank and file. He was, in the military parlance, known as a general of the soldier, a soldier general. I mean, the term may be peculiar to the army. In 65 or, if you recall, Pakistan had superior aircraft vis-a-vis our Air Force. They had the F-86, the American Sabre jets. India did not have a matching. We had the older fleet, but despite that, our Air Force was able to achieve a decisive victory on the Pakistani Air Force, including launching air raids deep inside enemy territory. And if you take the historical perspective, on the 1st September when Pakistan launched the attack in Chamjoria as part of the Grand Slam, they were heading for the Akhnur Bridge, which was the only lifeline of connection to our forces deployed in Rajouri and Poonch sector. Right. If they had succeeded, then these forces would have been cut off from the supplies. it was because of the intervention of the Air Force that we were able to prevent it.
Right, Rajkadian, and if I could just interrupt you there, we are getting visuals of a flypast which is just taking place. This is what had been told by the Indian government, something which would be carried out in honor of Arjan Singh. So we now see the flypast, which is presently underway as the skies are absolutely clear. This is another of those little things which is being done in honor of Arjan Singh as he's being laid to rest today at the Brar Square. These are live visuals which we are in fact getting as the family also is carrying out the rituals that they believe are necessary according to the religious and traditional part of the final rites which are being performed at the Brar Square. So it is a state funeral, and also the family is performing their own traditional rituals which are a part of a funeral. Rajkadian, you were talking to us about the 1965 war and the impact which Arjan Singh had, because he'd just taken charge of the Indian Air Force, and at that time the Indian Army had suffered some reverses, and it is in these circumstances that he was called up to take charge, and he actually delivered in his very nonchalant way, where he said, in an hour's time we can strike the enemy, and this is what he exactly did.
Yes, it's a matter of record that when the government took a decision to get the Air Force involved, which always means an escalation in the war. He was asked, how long will the Air Force take to get ready? He said, just 2 hours.
Right.
That means, as a Air Chief, he would have done the foreplanning, he would have foreseen the situation and was ready.
Right.
And, of course, the Prime Minister at that time, Lal Bahadur Shastri, also a matter of record. He asked him only one question, which in Hindi, he always spoke Hindi, "Ye sambhal loge? Will you be able to look after?" He said, yes. And he said, okay, then go ahead. That is how our forces in Poonch and Rajouri were saved from getting cut off by the Pakistani pincer movement heading for Akhnur Bridge. Now, of course, we have more bridges to cater for such an eventuality. But Air Force played a stellar role.
Right.
And apart from his professional competence, Arjan Singh always exuded grace, elegance, and dignity.
Absolutely.
As a person, as a leader, he also lived a very selfless life. It is known, widely known, that out of his personal savings, he had sold a farmland somewhere. He donated 2 crore in a trust for the welfare of the retired airmen and their family.
Absolutely.
I think that is the degree of selflessness. So, an air chief or any chief is not only an individual, he is also an institution. And Arjan Singh, yes, he signified the institution of Air Force. He carried out his duty with great professionalism and elan. He motivated many youths to join the Air Force as fighter pilots.
Absolutely, indeed. Rajkadian, do continue to stay on with us. We're also joined by Jagan Mohan. Both of you gentlemen do stay on with us. Meanwhile, let's dip in and listen into what is happening at the Brar Square as the ceremony is presently underway there.
mortal remains of the Marshal consigned to the flames, and the Marshal will be a part of the eternal list of warriors who will be etched into the memoirs of every great nation.
So arguably one of the greatest war heroes, the architect of the Indian Air Force, someone who turned the Indian Air Force into a formidable fighting force, something which the world would sit up and take notice in the year 1965, where for the first time the Indian Air Force was put to test and came out in flying colours, despite having been pitched in against an opposition which was of much superior in terms of the military hardware which they had at their disposal in 1965. We of course see the dignitaries who were present as the fire was lit. Former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh present there, and also we saw Defence Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, who was also present during the final rites which were performed for late Marshal of the Indian Air Force Arjan Singh. A 17-gun salute was accorded, and we also saw 3 MKI-30 Sukhoi jets which participated in the flypast. The Indian national flag will fly at half-mast at all government buildings in New Delhi, where it is regularly flown as a mark of respect for Arjan Singh. He was 98 when he suffered the heart attack on Saturday and then passed away. And also we still have Raj Kadian and Jagan Mohan with us. Jagan, if I could come to you now on this. You know, a lot of people today perhaps may not actually appreciate the situation that India was in 1965. Today India has at its, can practically go and purchase any military hardware in the world. We've purchased the Dassault Rafale, one of the finest military Air Force jets that we've got at our disposal. Other nations are, jostling with each other to try and sell military hardware to India. But back then, the situation was completely different. India did not even have access to MiGs in the 1965 war. And despite the rudimentary kind of hardware that we had at our disposal, we managed to take on the Pakistanis, who had the equipment supplied to them by the Americans because they were in a treaty with the Americans. And we managed to come good and managed to beat Pakistan in 1965.
You're right, Saleh. The Indian Air Force was mostly dependent on the British hardware at that time. I would be hesitant to say that the equipment was inferior, because some of the fighters that we had, like the Hawker Hunter or the Fallen Nad or the English Electric Canberra, were equally good. But as you know, the Americans, with the strength of their technology and electronics, they always have a better version of the aircrafts out there. And as you rightly mentioned, the Pakistanis also had a Mach 2 capable jet fighter called the F-104 Starfighter, whereas and they've been operating it for more than 6 years. One of their squadrons was very well trained with experienced pilots and all. In the meantime, the Indian Air Force had only recently acquired MiG-21 fighters, and we had less than half a dozen of them on strength when the 65 war broke out. So even though we had some equipment at our side, these are all newly procured, and due to the expansion of the Air Force after the 62 war, we could never concentrate all our best units on the Western Front. Like our Air Force units are spread out throughout both West and East.
Absolutely.
And General Kadian had, in fact, raised a very interesting anecdote about how Marshal Arjan Singh responded on the first day. It would also be interesting to the viewers to note that on that very first day, when he was summoned to the Defense Minister's office and asked to intervene on the ongoing land battle, it was about that time the Army Chief asked for approval to cross over the Chogil Canal into Lahore on September 6th. But what many people don't realize is that the Indian government at that time prohibited the Indian Air Force from attacking Pakistani airfields as retaliation for the Chamba attack. And the Air Force sort of went into the war with one of its hands tied behind its back. And Marshal Arjan Singh had to, lead the Air Force with these constraints put on them by the civilian government at that time.
Absolutely. And also considering the fact that Arjan Singh became the chief of the Indian Air Force at the age of 44, and he served from 1964-65 till 1969. Rajkandyan, if I could come to you on this, how instrumental has his role been in turning India's Air Force, which had remained very largely untested after the Second World War, within a span of like 20 years, to turn it around on its head and make it into such a formidable air defense force?
Well, if you go back into the history in 1950s, our country had a policy of non-alignment, and it was visualized that there will be no war. In fact, defense forces were given a very low priority by the then political leadership. It is only after the 1962 defeat that we suffered in the Northeast in the hands of Chinese that the importance of military came into being, both induction of manpower as well as newer equipment. 65 Air Force was still in a very nascent stage. We had a mix of hunters, gnats, mystiers, and I think the Russian MiGs had just started coming in, but not were fully operational.
Rajkandyan, do continue to stay on with us. We also are joined in by Air Marshal B.K. Pandey. Mr. Pandey, if I could come to you on this, we just saw the final rites of Marshal of the Indian Air Force Arjan Singh being performed. As someone who's an Air Marshal yourself, I would like to know from you, how big a loss is this for the Indian nation?
Sorry, what was your question?
My question to you was, as someone who served in the Indian Air Force, Air Marshal, my question to you was, Arjan Singh has just been laid to rest. I want to know from you, how big a loss is this for the Indian Air Force and also for the Indian nation at large?
Well, it's very symbolic because it reflects the value that the late Marshal of the Indian Air Force had for the service and for the nation. He was iconic. He was the only Marshal of the Air Force that we have seen, and he deserved this befitting farewell. And of course, he's not going to be with us anymore, but his memory will live forever.
And also, how critical do you think was his leadership? Because India was, of course, making strides from breaking away from the past and into the new world, where it would be air superiority which would define, which ways the battles will swing. And this is something that he exhibited in 1965 when he took charge of that war, when he was asked to by the then Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri. How significant do you think has his contribution been in Indian Air Force?
If you recall, the Indian Air Force was sidelined with the government in the 1962 war, for reasons best known to them. And at that time, Marshal of the Air Force Arjan Singh was not the chief. And he took over as the chief in 1964. And soon after that, we had to fight a war with Pakistan. And it was must have been a formidable challenge for him, because a government which was not inclined to give the Air Force any importance in war, as was evident in the 1962 war. Suddenly he was confronted with an enemy, and but he led the Air Force through the 1965 war with Elan, and we emerged with flying colors at the end of it. Maybe we were surprised a little in the beginning, but that was only for one day. And thereafter we had the complete sway over the Pakistani Air Force.
So are you saying that the Indian Air Force itself was surprised with the spectacular victory that it actually got in the 1965 war?
Well, I would describe it as a spectacular victory, but certainly we had an edge over the Pakistani Air Force. And because, Marshal of the Air Force Arjan Singh, when he was in Air Headquarters initially as Deputy Chief and then as Vice Chief, he did lay the foundations of the future Air Force. In terms of training, manpower, infrastructure and so on, which is not widely publicized. But over the years now the Air Force has grown into the fourth largest in the world. And it's growing, it's modernizing, and all these processes were, shall I say, initiated by him.
Right.
And of course, it's being carried on.
And also, talk to us a bit about, how he was as an individual, because many a times the direction of a war is decided by the person who actually heads a particular army. So, as Arjan Singh, who was leading the Indian Air Force at that time, tell us about his leadership. What sort of a leader was he?
Well, as a human being, he was very humble and very gentle and very friendly. And the good thing about him was that he would allow his subordinates to take decisions and not hold the reins himself. He would definitely lay down the guidelines, the broad, the policies. But after that, it was incumbent on his subordinates to carry them forward. And now that is a very important quality of a leader, because without that an organization cannot function. It was not a one-man show.
It was not a one-man show, is how you describe it. And also, if I could get in Lieutenant General Raj Qadian, who's still with us. Raj Qadian, how do you summarize this for us? It's a huge loss for the nation, but tell us, how big a loss this is for Indian Air Force and India at large.
Yeah, recalling the 65 war, there are 2-3 points which are significant,
very quickly,
from particularly the Air Force point of view. First was 2 bold decisions taken by the Indian government of the time. One was to get the Air Force involved in the war on 1st September, and later to release further pressure to open the international front in Punjab area. This was a very strong decision taken by the then Prime Minister. The second part was that Arjan Singh's counterpart in Pakistan, the chief of Pakistan Air Force, was Air Marshal Asghar Khan. They were both batchmates from the Air Force College in London. And both had an agreement that we will keep the Air Forces out of the war. But when it came to the national priorities and the question of national security, Arjan Singh obviously put the personal equation in the back burner.
Absolutely, absolutely indeed. We'll have to leave it there. And Jagan Mohan, last word to you. This of course is almost an end of an era. Arguably the greatest air warrior of India is now a part of history for us. Summarize for us his achievements in very shortly, though.
Yes, I mean, you should realize that he was one of the last surviving officers who trained with RAF Cranwell. He joined the Air Force in 1939. He trained in UK for about a year and came back to join the fledgling No. 1 Squadron of the IAF in 1939. He was one of the first IAF commanders to lead a squadron into battle. He took No. 1 Squadron into war against the Japanese on the Imphal front. Was recognized by an award of the Distinguished Flying Cross, one of the only 22 DFC awards that the RAF had given to IAF pilots. And you could realize, looking at his career, that he was always a flyer to the very end. He loved flying. He was a leader from the front, and he always had the best of the the leadership positions. He was the commander of operations.
The best of the leaders. We'll have to leave there. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. Jagan Mohan, Lieutenant General Raj Qadian, and also Air Marshal B.K. Pandey for joining us. Without